The Fields of Arle, how to set up and play. The first thing you'll do is set out your resources. You've got your peat cubes, your sheep, your horses, and your cows. You've got your supply of wood and clay. These tiles have a reverse side, which represents the upgraded version. So timber is the upgraded version of wood, and brick is the upgraded version of clay. Next, you'll set out your supply board and put the stack of printed tiles in their designated spot. The other icon represents the reverse side of each tile. Next, each player will have a home board and a supply board. On the home board, the startup is printed on the board. So put the tiles on their indicated spot. Each player will start with 5 of these dikes. They'll start with a stall with a horse. They'll start with a grain field and a flax field. They'll start with this drained or dehydrated moor tile with 4 peat cubes on it, and they'll have 3 moor tiles. Next, put each of the resource tokens on their printed starting spot. You'll have food, wool, flax, pelts, grain, and a second food token. On each player's storage board, put the printed destination tile in each of their designated spots. And finally, each player will start with 4 wood, 4 clay, and 3 peat cubes. Next, you'll set up the main game board. First, we'll set out the buildings, shuffle the stack of green buildings, and you're going to randomly select 4 of those and put them on these indicated spots. Next, you'll shuffle the stack of yellow buildings, and you'll draw 2 of them for these spots. These buildings that have the name pre-printed on the game board, these buildings will be in every game that you play. And then finally, you'll shuffle the stack of blue buildings and draw 3 and place them here. And then these red buildings are in every game. Next, each player will get one of their markers placed on the first spot for each of the tools in the game. You'll put the round marker starting with round 1. The game is played over 9 rounds. You'll randomly select a start player. Their action markers will go on top, and the second player will be on bottom. The main part of each round is called the work phase. This is where you take turns to place your workers on unoccupied action spaces of the current half of the year. So we can see the game board is divided into 2 halves. The left half are all the action spaces associated with summertime, and those are available in these rounds 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. The right half of the board, these are all the actions associated with winter, or rounds 2, 4, 6, and 8. So since we're in round 1, a summer round, all of these actions on the left side of the board are available to the players. So one at a time, since the yellow player is the start player, they would select an unoccupied space and they'd resolve that action space immediately. And then the red player would go and they'd select one of the available unoccupied spaces and resolve it immediately. So you would continue going back and forth until all players have placed all of their action markers. One important rule is that one player is able to select an off-season action, and it's the first player to make that decision. So let's say the yellow player was right here, and they decide they really want to take one of these actions. So they'd come here, they'd resolve that immediately. Since they were the first one to make that decision, now all of these off-season actions are now locked. Nobody can take those. So these remaining action pawns have to go onto the summer side of the board. So you would continue until all players have placed. Again, resolving each action immediately. You go until all action markers are done, and that would finish the action round. Now let's cover each of the action spaces. All right, let's first cover all of the summer action spaces, starting with the fisherman. By coming here, you get to collect 1 sheep from the supply. You get to move your fish traps tool up by 1. you can see the fish traps is associated with this action spot. So if the yellow player came here, they'd get their 1 sheep. They would move up their fish traps by 1, now giving them 3 fish traps. And per fish trap, they get to move their food marker up by 1. So since they have 3 fish traps, they would immediately get to move their food marker up by 3 spaces. Next is the grocer space. By coming here, you get your choice of 1 timber, 1 brick, or 1 animal of your choice. Anytime you see this gray animal icon, it means you can take either a sheep, a horse, or a cow. So you get your choice of 1 of these 3, plus you get to move your grain marker up 1 space, and you get to take 1 leather tile from the supply. Next is the wool weaver. By coming here, you can do this conversion from wool to woolen based on how many weaving looms you have. So if it was the yellow player, you can see they have 4 weaving looms. They could do this conversion up to 4 times, basically moving their wool icon down based on how many times they're going to do it, and then for each time they moved it down, they could take a woolen tile. Next is the colonist. By coming here, you get to take a horse from the supply, and you get to flip over 1 of your moor tiles. Basically, you're draining the moor, or you're dehydrating it, so you get to flip 1 of those over, and you can see based on the printed icon, you would immediately take 4 peat from the supply and place them on this tile. Next is the peat cutter. For each spade you have, you can cut 1 peat off of your home board. So again, let's say this was the yellow player, and they had 7 spades. They could cut up to 7 of their peat. So again, going back to their home board, let's say they're going to cut all 4 of these. When you cut peat, it comes into your own personal peat supply. Once all the peat are removed from a tile, you can take that tile off the board, again, eliminating the negative points you would have had. It now frees up that space. So that was 4 of the peat they cut. They can cut an additional 3 peat off of that tile and take it into their supply. This will stay here until that final peat is cut. Once that final peat is cut, again, you could remove this, freeing up additional space. Next is the dike builder. By coming here, you get your choice of either 1 cow or 1 sheep, and then per shovel pair, you get to move 1 of your dikes. So in this example, yellow has 2 shovel pairs, so they can move 2 of their dikes in addition to taking the animal of their choice there. When you move 1 of your dikes, you can never remove it in such a way that it would flood your whole board. You can see this player's dike line is right there, making all of these spaces available. These spaces aren't available yet because the water could come in and flood that. So they can move 2 of these. So again, you can't allow your entire board to flood, so you can move that one up there. So now it's moved their dike line up to there. For their second dike move, you can see they couldn't move this one because that would allow the board to flood. But you could take 1 of these and then advance it to the next spot up there. Next is the clay worker. By coming here, you get clay for each shovel you have. So you can see the yellow player has 4 shovels, so they can take 4 clay from the supply. Next is the farmer. By coming here, you may buy or build a plow, and then additionally, or alternatively, for each plow you own, you can place either a flax or a grain field. So by coming here for the farmer, your first option is you could buy a plow. The plow is on the reverse side of the peat boat. You would put that into an available spot. You would have to pay the cost. Anytime you see this blue border, that represents the cost that has to be paid. So to buy this plow, you'd have to turn in 1 wood and either 1 cow or 1 horse. So once you have the plow, this player now has 1 plow, so they can either add a flax or a grain field. So you can take this from the stack. Let's say they decide to add a grain field. It has to go into an available spot. So let's say they place it there. Next is the forester. By coming here, you have to pay a food. If you don't have any food, you can pay with a grain, so move the marker down. but normally you would pay with a food. And then you have your choice. You can build a forest for free, or you can pay to build a building. If you're choosing the forest, you would simply take it off the game board and place it into an available spot on your board, again, behind or below your dike line. Let's say this player, instead of building a forest, by coming to the forester, they're going to build a building. To build a building, you're going to choose from one of the available buildings on the main game board, but you have to pay the indicated cost. So here you can see you've got to pay either one wood, clay, timber, or brick. In addition, you've got to pay 1 grain. To get either of these two buildings, you have to pay a timber and a brick. You can see the costs associated with these buildings. You have to pay a timber and either 8 flax or 8 grain. Here you've got to pay 2 brick and either 10 flax or 10 wool, 2 timber and 3 leather, 1 brick and either 1 brick and 2 different pieces of clothing. To get that one, here you've got to pay 2 brick and 25 food, 2 timber and 5 grain. And then for any of these 3 buildings, you have to pay 2 different wood, clay, timber, or brick, and 9 food. And then for any of these 3 buildings, you have to pay 3 timber, 3 brick, and 15 food. Once you pay for the building, you're going to take the tile and put it onto an available space on your home board. We'll cover the building effects later. Some have an anytime effect. Most of the buildings have an immediate one-time effect, which we'll cover later. Next is the woodcutter. By coming here, for each axe you have, you get to take 1 wood token from the supply. So we can see if the yellow player came here, they have 3 axes, so they would get 3 wood tokens. Next is the master spot. By coming here, you get to upgrade any of your tools. The number of tools you are able to upgrade is based on your workbench. So you can see this player has 2 workbenches, so they can upgrade 2 of their tools. They're going to have to pay the indicated cost for the tool they select to upgrade. One neat feature about coming to the master spot is you can choose to upgrade your workbench, and that effect would take place immediately. So let's say a player comes to the master. Let's say it's the yellow player. They would pay the 2 clay listed here so they could first upgrade their workbench. This now takes effect immediately, so they can do 3 tool upgrades. This was the first one, so now they have 2 additional. So they can select 2 of these tools. They would have to pay the cost, so let's say they pay a clay here to upgrade their pottery wheels by 1. And let's say they pay the 1 wood here to upgrade their axes by 1. You can only upgrade a tool 1 time. You couldn't upgrade a tool multiple times by coming to the master spot. Next is the carpenter spot. By coming here, you have the option. You can build 1 building. Again, you would have to pay the indicated cost based on the building you choose. Or instead of building a building, you can pay this cost, 2 clay and 1 grain, to build a stall. So let's say this player comes here, they decide to pay that cost, and then they would simply take a stall tile from the supply board here and put it onto an available spot on their home board. Next is the builder space. By coming here, you have the option. You can build 1 building. Again, you'd have to pay the indicated costs for the building you choose. Next is the warden space. By coming here, you can flip over one of the tiles that you already have on your boards as long as it has this flip over icon. So I've set this player up for all the different tiles that could be flipped, and you can see it's tiles with that icon. So if they had a stall on their home board, they could use that warden action and decide, I'm going to select to upgrade this one. Anytime you're doing that, it's for free. You don't have to pay anything. So you could flip your stall over and then you make it a depot where points on the goods track are doubled at the end of the game. We'll see that when we do final scoring. When you get your goods markers up here, for each marker that you have. You can see this is worth 3 points, 2 points for a marker that's there. By having a depot, you would double the points that come from that scoring. Next is the stable, and then you can see the stall holds 3 animals of the same type. So by doing that conversion, you no longer have a stall, you now have a depot. So if you had animals within that stall, you'd have to move them first. Next is the stable. The stable, you can see you can store 6 animals of the same type. If you decided to flip that one, it would become a double stall. So here you would basically have 2 different stalls. You have one stall that can hold 3 animals of one type, and another stall that can hold 3 animals of the same type. Another one of the tiles you can flip over is the forest. By flipping over the forest, it becomes a park. The victory points increase, and you can see you've got space to hold 1 animal of one type and 1 animal of another. Another tile you could flip over with the arrow icon would be one of your moors. So you'd flip that over to its dehydrated side. Again, you would add the 4 peat cubes if you decided to do that. Other tiles that can get flipped over would exist here on your other board. You can see a peat boat can be flipped over, and it can become a plow. Again, this is for free. So we saw earlier when you bought the plow outright, you had to pay the 1 wood and either the 1 cow or the 1 horse. If you were using the warden action to just upgrade this peat boat to a plow, you do that for free. You can ignore those costs. And then there's vehicles that you can upgrade. You can see you can upgrade this small handcart to a wagon. Again, you don't have to pay the cost, it's for free. And then here are 2 of the larger vehicles that by using the warden action, you can flip them up to the upgraded side. Again, pay attention to tiles with that icon. So the warden icon allows you to flip one of the tiles that you have on your boards for free. And the final summer space is the laborer. By coming here, you have to pay 2 food. Again, if you don't have any food, you can pay grain. And then you have your choice. You can buy a vehicle or you can imitate an action. Let's cover the vehicle first. To buy a vehicle, you would come up here to the supply board. There are 6 vehicles to choose from. It's basically these vehicles that have spots or spaces to carry goods. And then as we talked about in setup, you can see the board is pre-printed with the reverse side. So by purchasing a vehicle, you can choose any one of the 6. So you can choose this one, which will cost you 4 wood and 2 horses, or you could purchase the reverse side straight away. You'd have to pay 6 wood and 2 horses, and you'd have to have an available spot in your barn. So to get a vehicle, you can purchase straight away either side. You've got to pay the resource costs indicated, and then you have to have a spot in your barn. So here are the 6 different vehicle types placed together. You've got what are considered your small vehicles, your handcart, and your wagon. And then you have your 4 large vehicles, your cart, your horse cart, your carriage, and your droski. And again, keep in mind, space is limited in your barn. You've got available room for 4 small items. Here you can put a big, and then here this can either be a bigger item or a smaller item. Now, plows and peat boats have to be stored in your barn, but they're not considered vehicles. Back to the laborer action. By coming here, we've covered how you could buy a vehicle. Your other option is you could imitate. Again, you'd still have to pay the 2 food, but by coming here to imitate, you can imitate any occupied action, again on this side of the board, regardless of who occupies it. So maybe you went to a spot and you want to take that same action a second time, or the other player went there and you want to take that action. You could come to the laborer, pay the cost, and imitate that summer action. Now that we've covered all the summer actions, let's cover the winter side of the board. The first is the peat boatman. By coming here, you would take 3 peat cubes from the general supply. In addition, for each peat boat that you own, you would get one additional peat cube from the general supply. Next is the tanner. By coming here, for each fleshing beam that you have, you can convert one pelt into one leather. Next is the linen weaver. By coming here, for each of your weaving looms, you can convert one flax into one linen. Yellow player has 4 weaving looms, could do this conversion up to 4 times. Next is the butcher. By coming here, for each of your slaughtering tables, you can convert any animal into 3 food and 2 pelts. And then as a bonus, for each cow that you convert, you would get 1 additional food. Next is the cattle trader. Here you get 2 grain, 1 sheep, and your choice of 1 cow or horse. Next is the grocer. This allows you to cut 1 peat cube. You get 1 animal of your choice, 1 wood token, 1 clay token. Next is the builder's merchant. Here you get 2 hide, your choice of 1 wood or 1 clay, and then your choice of 1 timber or 1 brick. Next is the potter. For each pottery wheel you have, you can convert 1 clay to get 3 food and 1 peat cube from the general supply. Next is the baker. For each oven that you have, you can convert 1 of your grain and 1 of your peat cubes to get 6 food. Also, if you don't have any grain, you can substitute flax, and if you don't have any peat cubes, you can substitute wood. Next is the wood trader. You can see it has a cost to come here. You have to pay 1 food. If you don't have any food, you can pay grain, and then you have your choice. You can take 4 wood tokens, or you can pay to build a building. Next is the master. It works the same as the master in the summertime. For each of your workbenches, you can upgrade any of your tools 1 space. Just remember to pay the cost for the tools you decide to upgrade. Next is the wainwright. By coming here, you have the option to build 1 vehicle. We've seen how that works. You would pay your resource cost for the vehicle you choose, and or you can pay to build 1 peat boat. A peat boat will cost you 1 wood. Again, you've got to have an available spot on your barn for that. But the wainwright gives you the ability to do 1 or both of these actions. Next is the dike warden. It allows you to convert or flip over 1 of the tiles, just like the warden did in the summertime, and in addition, you can move 1 of your dikes. Next is the carpenter. By coming here, you have 2 options. You can simply pay 2 clay and a grain to build a stall. So you would take a saw from the supply and add it to an available space on your board. The other option you have is if you already have a stall, you can pay 2 brick to convert that stall to a stable. So let's say the player came here and they want to do that. So they pay their 2 brick. They have this stall here with some cow on it. They would simply just return this to the supply, and they would turn that into a stable. And they can place the animal right back on it. And the final winter action is the laborer. You have to pay 2 food to come here. If you're out of food, you can pay grain instead. And then you have the option. You can pay to build a building, or you can imitate, just like the imitate action in the summertime, but here you can imitate any occupied winter action, regardless of who occupies it. As we've talked through the action spaces, you saw that some of them gave you the ability to acquire animals. Let's quickly talk about legal spaces for animals. So we saw that stalls can hold up to 3 animals of the same type. Double stalls can hold 3 animals of one type and 3 animals of another type. In this example, we have cows and sheep, but you could have 3 cows and then 3 cows. It's 3 of one type and 3 of another type. The stable allows you to hold up to 6 of the same animal. We saw the park allows you to hold one animal of one type and another animal of any type. Additionally, your open field spaces can hold up to 2 animals of the same type. Again, they have to be behind the dike line. These are not available spaces for animals or buildings because the water can flood. And then finally, each of your dikes can hold 1 animal. Now that we've covered all the various summertime actions and the various wintertime actions that happen during the work phase, it's important to remember that there are also anytime actions. These are actions that players can perform as many times as they like and at any time during the work phase, as long as those actions are performed before we begin the end of season processing. Those actions include rearranging any of your animals on your board to legal positions. Another type of anytime action are activating buildings. So you can see, for example, this building has an anytime icon, meaning at any time you can convert 2 of your wool into 1 clay and 1 peat cutting on your home board. Another type of anytime action is using the peat boat, where you can see at any time you can convert 1 of the peat cubes from your supply to move 1 of your indicated goods markers. So you may decide, you know what, I'm going to turn in 4 peat cubes to move up wool twice and food twice. And that's the peat boat action. That can be done at any time. Keep in mind, since the space track only goes up to 15, that's the maximum number of resources that you can have for any of these goods. The one exception is food, because you have 2 different food tokens. So you could have 1 token on 15, and you could have your second token on 15 for a maximum of 30 food. The other goods on this track can only go up to 15. Also, at any time, you can remove 1 of the tiles in your barn to make room for something else. And the final anytime action that can happen during the work phase is loading your vehicles. Vehicles can be loaded with several different things. You may decide, I'm going to load a piece of wood onto an available spot. By loading it, you would flip it over to its upgraded side. Now that wood has become timber. Now you're not going to get that right away. So even though you can load your vehicles as an anytime action, you're not going to unload your vehicles until we get to the end of season process, which we'll cover later. So wood is one of the available items you can load onto your vehicle. You can also load clay. You can see that to load clay, it's going to cost a peat cube. So if I want to load this clay onto a vehicle, I'd have to pay 1 of the peat in my personal supply that I've already acquired, and then I would flip this over, and now it becomes brick. So you can load both wood or clay, and then when you load them, you flip them over so they convert to timber and brick. The other types of items that you can load onto your vehicles are the raw materials. So you may decide, I'm going to load some leather onto a vehicle. I would flip it over and it becomes leatherware. You can also load linen, and linen would get flipped over to make summerwear. Now keep in mind, you only have the available spaces that are on your vehicle, because again, these are not going to unload until at the end of the season. So maybe instead of loading this one, you decide instead to load woolen to convert it to winter wear. And the final type of item that you can load onto your carts are these various travel destinations. Basically, you're going to travel to this destination. You're going to bring with you some type of good or resource that you're going to trade for food. Again, you have to have an available spot. So in this example, let's say we're making a delivery to Bmore. We would take this, we would put this on our cart here. Now these work a little different. So you have to pay the resource right away that you're trading. So in this example, we have to pay 1 of our peat cubes back to the supply, and now we immediately get the 2 food. So we can move our food marker up 2 spots. Like all the other tiles that we load onto vehicles, these will not get pulled off, including the destinations, until we get to the end of season processing. A couple additional rules. You can load these in any configuration you like. So maybe, for example, you want to load the city destination there, and then maybe you want to put that one there, and then maybe you didn't want to do this one. So you can do these in any configuration you like. Just be mindful of a couple things. So the first thing you'll notice is this double space. So you cannot split the double space. So you couldn't put a single tile there because you'd be splitting the double space. You could put this here because you wouldn't be splitting it, but you couldn't do this because, again, you're splitting it. Now, if you decided to put a one that has 3 spaces, that's fine because you're not splitting the double space. Both spaces are being used for the same type of tile. Another thing to keep in mind are some of these city destinations, as you can see, don't fit there because they require 4 spaces. So you would maybe instead decide to load your wood there to convert it to timber. You would use your large vehicle here so you can make that delivery there. And then maybe you would load your clay there to convert it to brick. And then you would load your linen there to make some summerwear. So just be mindful of some of the restrictions. And then finally, you'll notice that this hand cart is not in the same orientation. You're turning it sideways here. The reason why that's important is if you flip this over to the wagon, you'll see these have to get loaded this way. This isn't something where you could load like that. That doesn't make sense because these are turned this way, so you couldn't do that. So the wagon can only hold 2 different single space tiles. So since we're here, let's talk about how these destination tiles work. So to make a delivery to Norden, you have to be able to deliver at least one of these items. You can deliver 1, 2, or 3 as long as you can at least deliver one. So you may decide, I'm going to make a deliver to Norden, and I'm going to place it there, and I'm going to immediately turn in, let's say, 1 sheep to get 4 food. As long as you can at least deliver one of the items on the destination tile, you can take it, place it, and take the food. Now, if you wanted to, you could do 2 or even 3. You could turn in a sheep, turn in a piece of leatherware, turn in a piece of winterwear, and get 4 plus 5 plus 7 food immediately. Let's look at these other ones. To make the delivery here, you'd have to discard either a flax or a grain field from your home board, and you would get 1 food immediately. We saw this one. You got to turn in one of your peat from your supply to get 2 food. To visit here, you'd have to discard a plow from your barn, return that back to the general supply, and that would get you 8 food. Let's look at these next 3. To deliver to Emden, you would have to at least do one of these. Turn in a peat to get 3, turn in a summerwear to get 6 food, turn in a leatherwear to get 7 food, turn in a winterwear to get 7 food. Again, at least one of these. To visit Aurich, you'd have to turn in a leather to get 4, any animal to get 4, or specifically a horse to get 5. And to visit this destination, you'd have to turn in a pelt by moving your token down to get 2 food, move your grain token down 2 spaces to get 4 food, or turn in a woolen to get 4 food. And let's look at these last 2 tiles. The first one is Lear. To make this delivery, you could turn in a flax by moving your token down to get 2 food. You could turn in linen for 3 food. You could return one of your cows to the supply for 5 food, or you could choose one of the 3 pieces of clothing, either leatherwear, summerwear, or winterwear, to get 6 food. And the final destination is Bremen. Again, as long as you can do one of these 5, you can visit the destination. Again, you can do as many as you're able to or would like to. I'm going to work backwards on this one. So here you would have to turn in all 3 pieces of clothing, or you can turn in all 3 pieces of the raw materials, the woolen, the leather, and the linen, to get 12. You can turn in 2 animals of the same type to get 9. You could turn in 1 piece of timber to get 5. And or you could decide to discard one of your more tiles. You can see it doesn't get you any food. Here's how it would work. You can discard any one of your tiles, including the small one that you started the game with. You would completely discard that tile. It doesn't matter which side it's on, whether it's on the peat side or the flooded side. You would simply return that completely. You don't get to collect any of the peat, so if you choose to discard this one, you would simply take it off your board and return this peat to the supply. If you decided to discard this one, you would just discard it completely. You're not flipping it over. Again, you can even do it with a small one that you started with the game. Again, just discard it completely. Any peat on it just gets returned to the supply. Now that we've covered all the different actions and anytime actions, let's talk about how inventorying works. So at the end of the work phase, after all the action tokens have been placed, and after players have done any of the anytime actions that they want to perform, we now move to inventorying. It's going to work a little bit different at the end of a summer round and at the end of a winter round. You're going to follow this procedure. This is the November inventorying that happens at the end of a summer round, and this is the May inventorying that happens at the end of a winter round. You'll see that the very first thing that happens is that all players now unload their vehicles. So they would simply go to their barn. Any of the vehicles that they loaded up, now they simply take those tiles off their vehicles. Now they have access to these resources. So those come into their supply. The only one that's different are any destination tiles that they have simply get flipped over and they get placed on their travel experience. After players have unloaded their vehicles, they get to milk their animals. If they have sheep or cow, if they have 2 sheep, they would get 1 food. 5 sheep, they would get 2 food. And if they have 8 or more sheep, they would get the maximum of 3 food. Again, for cattle, if they have 1 cattle, they'd get 1 food, 3 cattle, 2 food, and 5 or more cattle, they would get 3 food. Now you're going to look at the different types of tiles you have on your home board. For each grain field that you have, you can move up your grain marker 1 space. For each flax field you have, you get to move up your flax marker 1 space. And for each forest you have, you get to collect 1 wood token from the supply. Finally, you're going to have to pay and prepare for winter time by feeding your family. It's going to require 3 food. If you run out of food, you can use grain to substitute. And if you run out of grain, you can use any type of animals to substitute. And then finally, you're going to have to pay 2 peat to heat your home for the winter time. If you run out of peat from your personal supply, you can substitute with wood. For any resources that you're short, you're going to lose 2 victory points per resource. You would simply mark that on the score pad as a supply bottleneck. If this was the end of a winter round, we would use the May inventorying procedure. Again, all players would empty their carts and pull the tiles off their carts, but we can see animals get to breed. So animals will breed if they're in a stall or a stable. For each pair of animals, as long as there's room, they will reproduce. So you can see in this stall, we have 2 horses. The stall can hold up to 3. So for each pair, we would get a horse and there's room. We can see in this double stall, this pair of cows will produce a cow, but the sheep, it's at the maximum. It already has 3 sheep. So even though we have a pair, there's no room for the sheep. So it may have been smarter before the work phase ended to maybe move this sheep, because remember, that's an anytime action. You can move your animals around, put it on the dike. So now the stall would get you both a cow and a sheep. In this stable, we can see it can hold up to 6. We have 2 pairs, so we would add 2 sheep here. After animals have reproduced, you get to shear any sheep. For 1 sheep, you would get 1 wool. For 4 sheep, you would get 2 wool. And for 6 or more sheep, you would get the maximum of 3 wool. And finally, you have to pay 3 food. Again, if you don't have food, you can pay grain. And if you run out of grain, you can pay animals. You'll see there is no peat required at the end of a winter round. Again, for each resource you're unable to pay, you'll lose 2 victory points at the end of the game. Once we finish the inventorying phase, we're ready to switch seasons. So you'll see we have December preparations. All you do for preparations is move the round marker, shifting us over to the winter season. You're now going to pass the start player to the other player unless a player gave it up by going to an off-season action. So here normally the start player would pass from the yellow player to the red player, but since the red player was the first to take an off-season action, they gave up start player. So this is going to stay with the yellow player. So now you can simply reset all of the action tokens. Since yellow is going to be the start player, you'll put them back on to the action markers, ready to start the new season. Now you're ready to start this next round, which is round 2. It's a winter season, so all of these actions are now available. And just like before, the first player to jump and take an off-season action will lock that side of the board, but they would give up start player for the next round. Once you finish the 9th and final round and have completed the entire round, including the work phase and the inventorying, you're now ready to move to final scoring. Simply take the score pad, and players are going to score victory points in each of these categories, starting with the clothing tiles and building materials. So look at these tiles in front of the players. First check the clothing tiles, either the raw form of the good or the converted form of the good, like the clothing. Simply add up the victory points on these tiles. Look at the building materials. They give victory points, like timber, you can see gives a half point, and bricks give 1 point. Add these together. Next, you're going to move to equipment in the barn. So simply add up all the victory point on all the equipment that's been gathered. Make sure that this space has been covered, else it's worth -3 victory points. So add those together and note those on the score pad. Next is travel experience. Simply look to see how much travel experience came from flipping over those destination tiles. You can see this player got this high, so they would log 5 victory points. Next, you get victory points from all your tool advancements. So simply look at where each player has their marker on each of the tools. So you could see for workbenches, the yellow player would get 4 victory points, but the red player wouldn't get any victory points. So look at each tool and tally all the victory points. Next is the goods track. And don't forget, if you have a peat boat, to turn any excess peat to move markers up as you're able to. But you're simply going to look at any markers that are in these victory point locations. So you can see this player has 2 markers on 3 victory points, and then 1 marker here for 2, and 1 marker here for 2. So 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. So they would log 10 victory points for this goods track. One thing to keep in mind is if a player does have the depot, they get to double points on the good tracks. So since this player has a depot, instead of getting 10 victory points, they're going to get right down 20 victory points. It doesn't matter how many depots that you have, you only get to double that once. Next are any victory points on your home board. Simply look at any tiles that have victory points printed on them from buildings or fields and tally those together. Be mindful of possible negative victory points. So if this player wasn't able to get this more removed, you can see it's going to be -4. And if they weren't able to get their dikes to the highest level, here's an additional -1 and another -1. Next is animal scoring. So you're going to receive victory points for the animal that you have the least of and the animal that you have the second least of. So we can see in this example, we have the least amount of horses. So you'll get 2 victory points for each animal you have the least of. So this horse is worth 2 victory points. And then we can see sheep is the next one. So we have 3 sheep. You're going to get 1 victory point for each of these sheep. So 2, 3, 4, 5 victory points for these animals. The animal type that you have the most of do not score any victory points. Now keep in mind, let's say this player didn't even have a horse, and you look at it this way. The animal they have the least of is still a horse. So since they don't have any horses, 0 times 2 is 0. And then you would just get 1, 2, 3 victory points. Remember, it's 1 victory point each for the animal you have the second least of. The cows aren't worth anything since that's the animal you have the most of. And finally, look at any supply bottlenecks. These were negative victory points that you lost potentially if you weren't able to satisfy the end of season food or heating requirements. Now simply tally each player's victory points together. Most victory points wins the game. Before we end, let's look at all the different building types in the game. These first 4 buildings are the light green buildings that are recommended if you're a beginner at the game. They each will give you a benefit before the November inventorying phase. You can see the farmer's house. You would get 1 clay and you could cut 1 peat. With this one, you could take either a flax or a grain field onto an available space. Here you get 1 grain and you can advance 1 dike. And for this building, you would take 1 wood token and you could advance 1 of your tool markers. You would have to pay the indicated cost for the tool. These next set of buildings are the more advanced green buildings. So once you are past your beginner game, this is where you would draw 4 randomly as part of setup. And you can see these buildings give you an anytime action. That's what this clock icon represents. So if you own this building on your home board at any time, you can use the benefit of the building. Here you could move down through your flax marker 3 spaces and get 1 linen and cut 1 peat. Here you could trade in 2 of your wool by moving it down to get a clay and cut a peat. Here again at any time you could pay 1 brick and 4 food to convert a stall to a stable. And then here you could move your grain marker down 1 and turn in a peat from your personal supply to get 3 food. This building allows you to load 2 peat cubes from the general supply onto a vehicle. Now they have to get loaded onto a single space as the graphic represents, and then you would get that peat when you unload the vehicles. Here, if you have 2 or more horses, you could turn in 3 flax to get an additional horse. And then finally, this anytime action, you could trade in 1 food and 1 timber to get 2 wood. These next 5 buildings are your small craft buildings or the yellow buildings. During setup, you're randomly going to set 2 of these out on the game board. It's important to remember that when you purchase and build these buildings, it's a one-time immediate effect. So for example, when you purchase and build this building, for each forest tile that you have, you get a cut 2 peat and get 1 wood token. Here, again, one-time immediate. For each fish trap you have, you can cut 1 peat. For the smithy, for each peat boat, wagon, or hand cart that you want to exchange, you can turn those into the supply to get a plow. So you can turn in any number of these in exchange for a plow. Again, one-time immediate. Here, you would look at all your dairy animals, your cow and your sheep. If you have 5 total, you can advance all of your good markers, 1 space each. If you have combined 10 of those animals, you can advance all your markers 2 each. And if you have combined 15 animals, you can advance all of your good markers 3 spaces each. And then finally the bakehouse. For each oven that you have, you can do this conversion. Exchange 2 grain and 1 flax for 8 food. Again, this would be immediately when you acquire the building. These next 6 buildings are the major craft buildings. They're the orange buildings, and all 6 are going to be in every game. Again, these are one-time immediate effects when the building is first built. We can see here for the mill, for your total flax or grain fields, if you have 3 altogether, you would get 8 food. If you have 5 total fields, 10 food. And if you have 6 total fields, you would get 12 food. For the weaving mill, you would immediately get 1 winter wear tile, and you would advance your weaving looms tool 2 spaces for free. You don't have to pay the tool cost. Here for the textile house, you get 1 each of the raw goods, a woolen, a leather, and a linen. For the saddlery, for each horse that you have, you get a cut 1 peat, and you get to move your fleshing beams tool 1 space, again for free. The waterfront house, you would get 10 food immediately. You would get to advance 2 dikes, and you would advance your fish traps tool 3 spaces for free. You don't have to pay the tool cost. And then finally, the joinery. For each plow that you have, you get 1 horse, and for each peat boat that you have, you get 2 peat cubes from the general supply. Again, all these buildings are one-time immediate effects when acquired. These next 6 buildings are the inns. They're the blue buildings. As part of setup, you're going to randomly draw 3 for the game. Again, these are one-time immediate effects. For the potter's inn, per pottery wheel tool that you have, you get 1 animal of any type. For the farmer's inn, you're allowed to convert either a flax or a grain field to a forest. You would simply discard these tiles and take the forest tile. You can do this up to 3 times when the building is acquired. Here, you get your choice of a peat boat or a hand cart, and in addition, you get leatherware and a woolen. Here, for each stable, you would collect 1 brick, and for each stall, you would collect 1 timber, and for each double stall, you would get 2 timber. Here, you would get 1 cow immediately, and then for each cow that you have, you would be able to cut 1 peat. And then finally, this building, you get to move your fish traps tool 2 spaces for free, and then for each fish trap tool that you have, you get to collect 1 wood token from the supply. And finally are the 3 large buildings. These have the red back, and all 3 large buildings will be in every game. The first one is the Barham Castle. You get to advance both your ovens and your weaving looms 1 space each for free. In addition, you get to do 1 conversion on any tile with that symbol. This castle allows you to take 1 forest tile and place it on an available space. In addition, you get to advance your spades, your pottery wheels, and your workbenches, all 1 space each for free. And finally, the village church. In addition, obviously, to the victory points at endgame, this one immediately gets you a carriage. Again, just like those other building tiles, these are immediate one-time effects. And that should be everything you need to set up and play the Fields of Arle.